Good afternoon, everyone. People are trickling in from the waiting room slowly, so we'll give a couple of seconds for folks to migrate into the Zoom room. Thank you very much for joining us today for another edition of the Gender Equity Education Series. We're entering now topic 2 of our 3 topics for the year, and our topic for the next couple of months is creating and retaining a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce, with a lot of focus on faculty development, but workforce broadly. And we're very excited today to have Dr. Molly Carnes from the University of Wisconsin talking to us about bias reduction in medicine. I think she has a very exciting program and lots of evidence to share. So we're very excited to have her here. I do want to mention that this session is co-sponsored by our Office of Faculty Affairs. And so thank you very much for that support. And as we've done in the last 2 sessions, I want to offer not just my vision or Dean Page's vision of gender equity at the institution, but to give a glimpse into other folks who are members of our community who are supporting gender equity, working towards equity and inclusion. And so for this session, I've asked Dr. Kristen Pierce, professor of medicine and infectious disease specialist, COVID expert extraordinaire, supporting our staff and our patients through the COVID-19 pandemic. And I've asked her to talk for a couple of minutes about what gender equity means to her and how it's supported and enhanced in her sphere of influence. So Dr. Pierce, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you very much for asking me to share my voice, and welcome to Dr. Carnes. I'm very excited to hear your talk. A group of female colleagues and I recently met to revitalize a Women in Medicine group for the Department of Medicine. And we got to talking about all the colleagues we've spoken with at meetings nationally and locally, and the stories that they share of inequity, lack of salary equity, lack of leadership, promotions, or mentorship. And these stories always end the same way. We end up looking at each other across the proverbial table and saying, how do we fix this? Because this work really is not ours alone. And I think we all agree that in order to affect real change, our male colleagues need to be doing this work alongside of us and accept that there is an issue and want things to change. That idea of he for she is so vital. And I think specifically for me, when I think about gender equity, I think about 3 things. First, I think about financial equity. And it's disheartening that in 2021, we are still saying equal pay for equal work, but it's still a big issue. Secondly, I think about leadership and representation equity, and we really need to have women on university and national committees and positions of leadership. And we need to ask our male colleagues to be nominating female faculty for these positions. As an aside, I would love to see an all-male panel talking about gender equity and how they plan to affect change. So that's something I'd like to see in the future. Lastly, I think career equity, and this is a bit more complex, but for me, it means having the support you need to build the career you want. We know that family needs disproportionately affect female faculty members, including childcare, but also household responsibilities, elder care, among other things. And I want to be clear that I feel childcare is indeed a huge factor, but not the only issue affecting female faculty. And I've heard from other female faculty without children, they often feel their voices lost in discussions of equity because they feel their outside responsibilities are somehow less. Many women choose not to have children, and supporting their outside needs is equally as important. So I think developing creative solutions to allow these faculty to take time off to work part-time if needed without losing their academic and scientific momentum and trajectory is crucial both to their academic success and for the institution at large. On a personal note, I have 2 sons, both of whom were born while I was a medical student here at UVM. And at the time, my Dean of Students, Dean Sproul, worked to find an academic and financial solution to help me stay in school on a training timeline without losing my financial support, and allowed me to take care of my family while maintaining some level of academic involvement. So I know that creative solutions are out there and possible. And lastly, overall, I think gender equity means not having to talk about gender equity. Equity is assumed and expected. And I think Dr. Doherty and her group are working to make us think about how these things can happen. We each bring something unique and important to the discussion. Diverse voices are vital at every table, every panel, and every committee. If most decisions are being made by the people who all identify as the same gender, race, ethnicity, sexuality, then we're not serving equitably. And in fact, we're devaluating the many diverse voices at UVM that support scientific excellence and provide excellent clinical medical care. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pierce. Those are inspiring words and a powerful statement for all of us to consider. I'm now going to turn it over to Dean Page to introduce our keynote speaker for today. Dean Page.
Thank you very much, Dr. Doherty. And Dr. Pierce, thank you for those comments. You said that so beautifully. I do want to acknowledge Dr. Doherty for this ongoing series and her leadership as Director for Gender Equity for the Larner College of Medicine. I don't ask a lot of Dr. Doherty, but I did ask for the privilege of introducing today's speaker because Dr. Molly Carnes is an old friend and someone I admire tremendously and couldn't have her come and visit us even virtually here in Burlington without getting to say a few words. So thank you for your indulgence, Dr. Doherty. First, the introduction. Dr. Carnes is a Virginia Valian Professor of Medicine, Psychiatry, and Industrial and Systems Engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she directs the Center for Women's Health Research in the School of Medicine and Public Health and co-directs the Women in Science and Engineering Leadership Institute, nicknamed WISELI, in the College of Engineering. Dr. Carnes received her undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan and her MD from the State University of New York at Buffalo. She then went to Madison, Wisconsin for internal medicine and geriatrics training, where she's stayed throughout her career, also earning a master's in epidemiology. Her groundbreaking research examines how stereotypes perpetuate inequities. Approaching unintentional stereotype-based cognitive processes as habits, she mobilizes behavioral change strategies to help faculty in medicine, science, and engineering break the bias habit. With support from the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Carnes has developed and tested interventions that change faculty behavior, improve department climate, and increase the hiring of women faculty and the retention of male faculty. She's currently leading the Bias Reduction in Internal Medicine study, or BRIM, a 19-site cluster randomized controlled study of bias reducing workshops. Dr. Carnes has published over 165 papers, served on 2 NIH advisory councils, and received a number of awards for her research, including the 2019 Bernadine Healy Award for Visionary Leadership in Women's Health, and the Academy of Women's Health, and the 2021 Distinguished Educator Award from the Association for Clinical and Translational Science. From a personal standpoint, I had the privilege of serving on the faculty at the University of Wisconsin in the Department of Medicine for 9 years with Dr. Carnes. She taught me so much personally, and she taught our department so much. She was a leader. She led by example. She helped me recruit one of the best recruits I've ever brought into a department of medicine, who has only continued to succeed. So it was a thrill for me when I found out Dr. Carnes would be joining us today. And I'm likewise looking forward to hearing her talk today, entitled Bias is a Habit That Can Be Broken. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Molly Carnes.
Thank you. All right, let me just share my screen here. That's not right, is it? Is it? Can you see that? Yeah. Okay, great. I wasn't sure if it was the full screen. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Page, for that introduction. It is great to see you too, even if it's on Zoom. So, and thank you for inviting me to do this lecture today. I just want to start by briefly acknowledging some of the many people who've worked hard to contribute to some of the work from our site that I'll be presenting. And of course, as you mentioned, those who have funded my research, including NIH, the National Science Foundation, and the University of Wisconsin. So I'm going to cover 4 points today. Stereotypes about groups of people underlie both overt discrimination, but also perpetuate unwitting, unintentional bias, so-called implicit bias. We all know these common cultural stereotypes, even if we consciously disavow bias against any group. But it turns out just knowing these stereotypes creates these passively acquired cognitive bias habits, and they distort the perception even of objective information. But the good news is these bias habits can be broken, but just like breaking any other habit, it takes more than simply good intentions. It requires hard work. So we'll just start with some data. These are data from the AAMC and the NSF survey of earned doctorates, looking at the percentage of different groups across stages of an academic career. So if you look at individuals who identify as being a member of a racial or ethnic group that has been historically marginalized in this country. So if you identify as Black or African American, Latinx or Hispanic, Native American or Native Alaskan, or member of an indigenous population of Hawaii or other Pacific islands associated with the US, like Guam. So this is over a third of the US population. And you can see there's underrepresentation of members of these ethnic and racial groups at all career stages, MDs, biomedical PhDs across the board. Now, if we look at women, predominantly white women, but nevertheless, if we look at women, there is inarguably amazing progress that has been made since Title IX, the Education Amendment of the Civil Rights Act, was passed in 1972, making the quotas that previously kept women out of higher education illegal. So once those quotas were illegal, women entered essentially all fields of science and medicine, such that we've had gender parity among medical students now for over 20 years. And we've had gender parity among biomedical PhDs similarly. And I think we can take some pride in the fact that about the same percentage of residents overall are women as are at the assistant professor level, so not a drop there. But then we do see a disproportionate loss of women at every subsequent career stage, particularly as we advance toward leadership. And no matter how you model that, it is a disproportionate loss. And we see that same pattern if you look at so-called well-represented minorities. So these are individuals who identify as being a member of one of the multiple subgroups that the way our country counts demographics are subsumed under the term Asian. So 6% of our population identifies being Asian, well represented in percentages at early pipeline stages in science and medicine. But just like with women, we see a disproportionate loss of talent as we move toward leadership. So it is important to know that we know common stereotypes about groups of people, even if we don't consciously endorse them, even if we don't believe them. So if we start in a gender context, even though we know gender doesn't exist as a simple binary, but along a much more nuanced continuum, if you live in this society, you are aware of binary gender stereotypes about men and women. And if I asked you to just off the top of your head, generate some stereotypes about men, you could easily do that. And you'd probably come up with the same kinds of stereotypes that every study that has done this over decades come up with. And you'd say, well, let's see, stereotypically men are strong, decisive, stubborn, ambitious, risk-taking, logical, independent. And these are called agentic traits and behavior. There's an assumption that they require human agency, individual human agency. Now, similarly, if I asked you off the top of your head to generate common stereotypes about women, whether you believe them or not, you could easily do that. And again, you'd probably come up with the same kinds of stereotypes that every study that's done this has come up with. And you'd say, stereotypically, Women are caring, nurturing, family-oriented, emotional, nice, helpful, dependent, and these are called communal traits and behaviors. Well, just as we're aware of common gender stereotypes, we also know common stereotypes about different racial and ethnic groups. And this was demonstrated quite clearly in a study from UCLA, had a very diverse group of participants, over 600 participants. Only 26% identified as white, 22% actually said they were born outside the US. And the investigators said, don't tell us what you personally believe, but what kinds of stereotypes are you aware of? What kind of stereotypes have you seen portrayed in movies, in the media? Now I'm going to list what they came up with, and I'll warn you, these can be difficult to read. They may be even triggering. They can make you uncomfortable, but this is what the data showed. So stereotypes about white people: high status, rich, intelligent, arrogant, privileged, blonde, racist, all-American, ignorant. Stereotypes about Asian people: intelligent, bad drivers, good at math, nerdy, shy, skinny, educated, quiet, passive. Now I'm going to put up the stereotypes they found for Black and Latinx people. And I will warn you, these are really painful to read. But just like with gender, if you live in this society, I do not think you are going to be surprised by the content of these stereotypes. We are aware of these stereotypes. So stereotypes about Black people: we're ghetto or unrefined, criminal, athletic, loud, gangsters, poor, unintelligent, uneducated, lazy. Stereotypes about Latinx people: poor, illegal immigrant, uneducated, family-oriented, lazy, unintelligent, loud, gangster. So you can see that Black and Latinx people in our society are stereotyped in ways that are incongruent with academic success or intellectual prowess. But it is stereotypes about these groups of people that at the institutional level are responsible for the fact that women are consistently paid less than men for the same work, that men are penalized for taking family leave, that there is lower funding from NIH for research on conditions more common in women and minoritized groups. These stereotypes are responsible at the interpersonal level for sexual harassment, microaggressions, and decisions about who to hire, mentor, sponsor, reward, publish, and fund. And at the personal level, these stereotypes are internalized, and they give rise to imposter syndrome, stereotype threat, decisions about where you fit. What career do you fit in? Do you fit as an orthopedic surgeon, or do you fit as a pediatrician? And they also help decide whether you will resubmit a grant application or a manuscript after rejection. So here's some things you need to know about stereotypes. They persist in the face of disconfirming data, because that is the way the human mind works. If we know something, and you can see we know common stereotype. If we know something, we tend to pay more attention to information that affirms what we already know, and we pay a little less attention to any contradictory information. And we see this in clinical decision making, right? You've heard about confirmation bias or anchoring bias. We tend to pay a little bit more attention to that clinical information that reinforces that initial diagnosis we thought the patient had. Stereotypes work the same way. A trivial piece of information brings the entire content of the stereotype to mind. So it could be skin color, accent, what somebody's wearing, where they went to school, and then all the content of the stereotype pops to mind. And once that happens, all subsequent information is filtered through that stereotype. And that will happen just because you know the stereotype. You don't have to believe them. And even if the information being filtered is objective. So we tend to apply these group stereotypes at the individual level to all individuals in a group. And depending on the situation, you can see how these stereotypes will create stereotyped advantaged and stereotyped disadvantaged groups. So just as we know stereotypes about different social categories, different social groups. We also have stereotypes about different occupations and different roles within those occupations. And it turns out research shows leaders are stereotyped as being competitive, self-confident, aggressive, ambitious, powerful, decisive. Now, reflect back to those stereotypes from that study at UCLA. Where would you get better alignment? Who would fit better with the stereotypes about leaders? Stereotypes about white people or stereotypes about Asian people? Right? Clearly, it's white people. Now, remember I showed you how Asian faculty, there is a disproportionate loss of talent among Asian faculty moving toward leadership. So the way stereotypes filter information, one would predict that white individuals, because they sort of look like a leader, being evaluated for or evaluated in a leadership position would be advantaged over Asian individuals because of those stereotypes. Now, returning to a gender context, again, remember those agentic traits and behaviors associated stereotypically with men and the communal traits and behaviors with women. Where would you get better alignment with leadership? Role congruity, as it's called by Alice Egley. Clearly, it's for men, right? Again, advantaging men and being evaluated for or in a leadership position over women. Now, remember I told you that stereotypes resist disconfirming data? This is a clear example of that, because there's something called the think manager, think male phenomenon, which was described decades ago by Shine and her research group. And they've showed that this think manager, think male phenomenon is pervasive, and it exists cross-culturally. It exists in the US, in Europe, in Asia. But despite the tenacity and pervasiveness of this think manager, think male phenomenon, there's a lot of research on leadership. And it pretty consistently finds that the most effective leaders lead with what is called a transformational leadership style. Right? These are leaders who are able to inspire members of an organization to invest time and effort beyond their own self-interest. These are leaders like Dr. Page. These are leaders who are very, very valuable to an organization. And transformational leaders do indeed engage in some agentic behaviors. They may be strong, they may take some risks, hopefully they're logical, but think about your effective leaders. They engage in a lot of communal behaviors. Transformational leaders care about members of the organization. They nurture talent. Hopefully they're even nice and helpful. Nevertheless, this think manager, think male phenomenon persists. We've demonstrated it in faculty at the University of Wisconsin, for example. So these graphs show the results of an implicit association test. These are timed sorting tasks developed by Anthony Greenwald and colleagues. Many of you are probably familiar with them. In this particular test, we asked over 600 faculty at the University of Wisconsin to take a test where on their computer screen, they were shown male or female gendered names, so like Ian or Jennifer, and words that are associated with leader, like strong, decisive, or words associated with a supporter role, like helpful. And it turned out over 70% of our male and female faculty, including me, more strongly match the male names and the leader words and the female names and the supporter words. I mean, I can promise you, if you ask our faculty, do you think there's anything about gender that would make you a more or less effective leader? They would scoff at you. I mean, we have many effective women leaders. Our beloved chancellor who is leaving, we were all sad about it, is a woman. And yet this think manager, think male phenomenon implicitly exists. And it's reinforced constantly. We won't even have Angela Merkel anymore when we're shown pictures of world leaders. Now everyone will be in a suit and a tie. So it's reinforced constantly. Now, because we know these gendered stereotypes, they create kind of implicit boundaries about how men and women should or should not behave. You can think of them as gender rules. And both men and women will pay social penalties if they behave too far beyond these gendered boundaries, if they break these gender rules, if you will. And we know this because we have words in the English language to describe men who are viewed as too communal. These are not flattering terms, right? Where it's like wimpy, sissy, weak. And we have words to describe women who are viewed as too agentic, right? Again, not flattering terms, words like bossy, domineering, abrasive. Shelley Carell did a recent, very elegant study from Stanford, in which she did text analysis of written performance evaluations for tens of thousands of workers in the tech industry, and found that there was a lot of what's called gender policing going on, right? To police individuals back in their gender box, if you will. So for men, there were phrases like needs to take charge, should be more assertive, needs to act more like a leader. For women, as you can imagine, the policing went more like needs to smile more, needs to be more collaborative, needs to be less abrasive. So you can see how these rules can put women leaders in a very difficult situation, right? Because if they behave in ways that they think are stereotypic for leaders, it puts them at risk of violating these gender rules. But I guess you have to take away that the good news is research shows there is no impact of gender on leadership effectiveness. Transformational leaders draw from both categories, agentic and communal, and there's some research to suggest that women are actually more likely than men to lead with a transformational style. All right. So physicians of color practicing in our country experience discrimination in the workplace. We did a systematic review, identified 19 studies since 2000, the year the AAMC really doubled down in increasing the diversity of the physician workforce. And we found that compared to white physicians, physicians of color practicing in the US reported facing greater scrutiny, being held to higher standards, having their competence questioned, needing to justify their credentials, and being mistaken for maintenance, housekeeping, or food service workers in the workplace. And Black physicians face the most discrimination, and experiencing discrimination had a lot of adverse outcomes, both health outcomes at the individual level and employment outcomes, including job turnover, which is very expensive for an organization and a real loss of human capital. So just to kind of show you how these stereotypes filter information that winds up with discrimination at the individual level, and also how this is how systemic racism works. So what you're viewing now on your screen are 3 slides that were sent to individual physicians. We have 3 departments, each one has 1 Black physician. And every month they were being sent these patient snapshots, as they're called, which were a summary of the patient satisfaction questionnaires regarding these physicians. And one of the questions is on the cleanliness of the clinic. Now, cleanliness is part of a deep-seated stereotype against Black people in our country. It was used for decades to justify Jim Crow laws. So the rooms, of course, I'm sure, as at Vermont, are randomly assigned based on availability. But every month, these Black physicians were being sent this snapshot showing that their clinic was rated lower. So the Black physician is the blue bar. The orange bar is all the other physicians practicing in this clinic area, and the green bar is all the other physicians in their discipline practicing. Now, if these patient evaluations are linked to merit pay, to promotion, to awards, as they were at our institution until we made this stop. And in fact, we stopped having this monthly belittling message sent to all physicians until we figure out what to do with it. But you can see how these stereotypes give rise to systemic racism if they're related to pay or promotion. All right, so here is how it works. Here's how stereotypes can prevent flourishing of faculty from any minoritized group, gender, race, any minoritized group. So let's say a physician engages in some behavior. They communicate with the nursing staff. Maybe they call attention to race bias in the patient snapshot. Or maybe there's some complex clinical decision that has an adverse patient outcome because we practice medicine and that happens. Now, if that behavior is filtered through the stereotypes, if the physician is a white male, remember those white stereotypes, male stereotype, say that directive communication with the nursing staff, that might be viewed, he's an effective leader. He makes it clear what he wants. If he calls attention to the race bias in this patient snapshot, whoa, he's so woke. He noticed that there was race bias in that patient snapshot. If it's a complex decision with an adverse patient outcome, when it's filtered through those very positive stereotypes, it tends to be given what is called a situational attribution. So it's nothing about the physician himself. There was something that caused that to happen. It was a difficult case. The best nurse wasn't working that day. He had trouble getting the equipment he needed. Now think about that exact same behavior. Oh, and no action is taken. No action is taken, or maybe he gets advanced, right? He's a leader. Now, that same exact behavior filtered through a very different set of stereotypes, say for a Black female physician, right? That directive communication with the nursing staff, no longer seen as effective leader. She's seen as disrespectful, or maybe she's angry. She calls attention to the race bias in the patient snapshot, and this is what actually happened to the Black physician who called attention to it, viewed as a troublemaker, just being difficult, challenging the status quo. And for that complex clinical decision-making with an adverse patient outcome filtered through those negative stereotypes of lower competence and ability, now that physician is given what is called a dispositional attribution. Not a problem with the situation. Is she a competent physician? Should she have her clinical privileges suspended? Again, as actually happened at our institution twice. So what happens to her? She is placed under heightened scrutiny, and she may even have disciplinary action taken for the exact same behaviors. This is how stereotypes work. So we really need to eliminate from our evaluation and review processes elements that are well known to disadvantage trainees and faculty from minoritized groups. Let's try to get rid of the subjectivity, ambiguity, personnel decisions based on limited data. If we have limited data, the human mind fills in with what it knows. That's the way the human mind works. And as we've seen, we know common stereotypes. All right, so to be clear, the negative performance expectations that arise from these group stereotypes are not borne out by actual performance. So just to pull a few studies that show that. In a study from Heckman at a large HMO, patient satisfaction scores were more negative for female and non-white physicians than men and white physicians, but the objective quality metrics were the same. Hofstra evaluated over 1 million PhD dissertations over a decade from all fields in the US, looking for novel ideas by using natural language processing and looking for novel co-occurrences, new words and new phrases that had previously not come together in fields of science. And it turned out women and non-white men actually had more novel ideas than their male and white counterparts, but these ideas were less likely to have an impact on the future of science because these individuals were less likely to become faculty members and their research was less likely to be published. And finally, in a study that looked at the outcomes of a large grant mechanism through the Gates Foundation, Koliv and colleagues found that among the awardees, the proposals submitted by women were actually scored worse than the proposals submitted by men. But in following the awardees after the grant was done, it turned out women were actually significantly more successful than men in securing subsequent NIH grants and publishing in top journals. All right, so that brings us to breaking the bias habit. As you know, breaking any habit is a multi-step process. It requires awareness, motivation, self-efficacy. You have to feel confident you can engage in a new behavior with some positive outcome. And it requires intentional, deliberate practice of the new behavior until it becomes habitual. So we had an opportunity with NIH funding to develop a workshop, a 2.5-hour workshop to promote gender bias habit reduction. And this study involved 92 STEM departments at UW-Madison: science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine, or units that function like departments. So every division in the Department of Medicine was treated as a department. And we randomly allocated 46 of these departmental units to get this workshop and 46 to remain as controls. And then outcome measures were online surveys at baseline, 3 days and 3 months after the workshop, essentially asking about the stages of change shown on the previous slide. So we found that faculty allocated to the experimental group compared to faculty in the control departments were using mixed effects linear models were significantly more likely to be aware of their own personal bias, to be motivated and confident that they could engage in bias reducing activities and that they were doing so on a regular basis. Well, you might say, okay, Molly, these are statistically significant, but look at that vertical axis. These are pretty tiny on a 7-point Likert scale. Does this have any real world impact? Does this have any clinical significance, if you will? So we also have a study through WISELI, led by Dr. Jennifer Sheridan, called the Study of Faculty Work Life. And this is a postal survey sent to all faculty members at the University of Wisconsin. And we timed it so one of these waves went out before our study started, and one went out after all 46 of the experimental departments had received the workshop. And we pulled out the 92 participating units and looked at questions that get at department climate. And we found that faculty allocated to the experimental group were significantly more likely than those in the control group to be experiencing an inclusive department climate. They were significantly more likely to say they felt they fit in their department. They felt respected for their research and scholarship. They felt comfortable raising personal or family obligations, even if it conflicted with department activity. Well, you might say, okay, Molly, I'm a little bit more convinced now, but these are still self-report. These are all based on survey. Do you have any real hard institutional outcomes? So we went back and looked at hiring patterns 2 years before the study and 2 years after the study. So the blue bars are 2 years before, the red bars are 2 years after, and these are percentages of new faculty hires. So the 2 bars on the left, or the 4 bars on the left, relate to gender. So in the experimental group, we essentially achieved gender parity among new hires. Essentially, half the new hires were women and half were men, 46%, with no change in the control departments, which remained at 32%. We also saw more ethnic and racial diversity among new hires in the experimental departments, and actually a drop in the control department. Now, these latter data were not statistically significant if you use inferential statistics, but we had the entire population of STEM departments at UW-Madison. So these were a real increase in numbers of BIPOC faculty in the experimental department. So obviously our next question was, does this breaking the bias habit approach work beyond a single institution and beyond just a focus on gender bias? So with another NIH grant, we launched, as Dr. Page said, the Bias Reduction in Internal Medicine study. This is also a cluster randomized control study of 3-hour habit reducing workshop involving 19 departments of medicine. And in each department, the divisions are randomly allocated to get the workshop early or to remain as waitlist controls for at least 3 months. And the outcome measures are, again, online surveys. So here's a picture of the participating sites. We had very good geographic distribution. We had good distribution between public and private institutions. And I'm going to show you some results that are really very preliminary. We just finished the complete data collection at the end of last month. But let's see, the way I can't actually read the top of my slide here, but I think it says intervene if I see a student, resident, fellow or colleague treated in a biased way. If memory serves me well, that's what it says. Now, in terms of saying I engage in this action on a regular basis. So the blue line are responses from the control divisions, the red line from faculty in the experimental divisions, baseline, no difference. At 3 months, faculty allocated to the experimental divisions significantly more likely to say they are engaging in this action on a regular basis. Well, you might say, maybe this is just social desirability, or what's called a demand effect of the survey. Maybe the faculty who got the intervention just really liked those people from Wisconsin who gave the workshop, and they wanted to answer in a way they knew that they would like. So to try to get around that, we pulled out the faculty who were in the divisions that got the workshop but didn't attend. So they answered the survey, but they did not attend the workshop. Because if the workshop had no effect, they should really look like the controls. But they looked actually a lot more like the faculty who got the workshop, who actually came. So it does suggest that this is not just a result, excuse me, of social desirability. And with a couple of other questions, we saw the same way. So challenge a personnel decision if they think it's been influenced by stereotypes, both a significant increase in self-efficacy, being confident that they could do this, and that they are engaging in this action on a regular basis. And again, pulling out those who didn't come to the workshop, but answered the survey, you can see they don't look exactly like the control group. So why do we think this approach worked? We think it worked because it engaged those responsible for setting the organizational behavioral norms, that is the faculty. The workshop incorporated strategies known to be effective in fostering sustained intentional behavioral change. Participation was voluntary, and it enabled social diffusion of the intervention by targeting the entire department or division, as you could see on the slides that looked at those who did not attend. So I want to leave you all with 2 of the evidence-based strategies that we give the participants in our workshop that you can all practice to break your own bias habits. The first one is practicing a growth mindset. So you probably all heard this term by now. It's taking the world by storm, based on about 20 years of very elegant experimental research from Carol Dweck at Stanford. And her group has studied this in its ability to overcome the behavioral effects of implicit bias. So it turns out simply telling yourself something like, with hard work, I can overcome the influence of stereotypes on my judgment and decision-making. That works. So write something like that down. Put it on a yellow sticky on your bathroom mirror, stick it to your computer screen, start your division meetings or your department meetings with a growth mindset statement. It works. The second one is to practice perceiving variability. Now, this is intentionally reminding yourself that every group is composed of multiple subgroups, because the more heterogeneous you view any group as being, the more difficult it is to generalize any specific characteristic to all members of that group. So an easy way to practice this is to tune your ear. Listen for when you hear somebody say members of some group are, any group, right? Women are, men are, surgeons are, people from Wisconsin are, Asian drivers are, anything. The next word is going to be a stereotype. Perfect opportunity to practice perceiving variability. I'll give you an example of something that recently happened to me. Somebody said, women physicians want to work part-time. I said, Some women physicians want to work part-time, some want to work full-time, some want to work 24/7. I also took the opportunity to remind him that some male physicians would like to work part-time, but are generally prevented from doing so by cultural stigma. All right, so summary and conclusions. Simply knowing stereotypes about groups of people create cognitive bias habits. These bias habits make us all unwittingly complicit in the perpetuation of inequities in our society. But with hard work and intentional practice of bias reducing strategies, bias is a habit that can be broken. And at least in our two studies, when faculty break the bias habit, it appears to improve the working environment for everyone, increase the diversity of new hires, and improve faculty retention. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. I'll stop sharing my screen. All right, let's see. I'll look at the chat here. Anybody have any questions? Or you can just unmute, I don't care.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice to meet you and thank you so much for your talk. This is Roxana, and just want to make sure what I understood. Your proposal is this: to remove our bias is a self-decision, and we need to work. Then my question is, in institutions, how can we work toward that? Because it's a self-decision. If I don't want, I will not move. We will not push. What is your recommendation for institution, for international, for our college, etc.? How can we, in a community, to work toward this self-encouragement?
Yeah, so a lot of people say that, well, really, you know, is it really going to work to just have everybody change their behavior? We need policy change. We need this. The behavior within organizations actually trumps policy change. It has been on the books for almost 50 years that we have equal pay for equal work for men and women. And yet study after study, in fact, the one that was recently summarized in the New York Times yesterday, shows that women physicians are paid less than male physicians for the same work. And this is true in almost every field, right? Because the behavioral norms actually are more powerful than policy. But policy is made by individual people. So if you can get, we think, this is why we focus on individual behavioral change. If we can get individuals to recognize how those policies are disadvantaging individuals like their Black colleagues who are practicing in the same clinic area, then you get those individuals to change those policies. As we stopped immediately sending those to all physicians until we figure it out, as we took away the linkage of those patient snapshot scores to an institutional reward, which has been given to physicians. So we argue that until you get the members of an organization to change their own behavior and recognize the structural nature of sexism, racism, whatever, nothing will change.
Dr. Carnes, my follow-up to that question is then what is the role of policy, of putting through those sorts of institutional changes? Because I have to believe that both are important.
Absolutely.
In some way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, like any organizational change, it takes multi-level interventions. And again, I love to use smoking cessation as an analogy of institutional change, right? Because nobody can argue that with smoking, there hasn't been a complete cultural change over the last like 40, 50 years. I mean, when I went to medical school, I know this is impossible for people to believe now, but the professors smoked in the classroom. And when I was an intern, nurses would leave lit cigarettes in ashtrays in little rooms right off the intensive care unit. And that was the norm. And the fact that nobody could even believe that is a sign of cultural change. But once you had to get enough people to stop smoking, to then advocate for the policy change. and then it accelerates, right? Then you have the policy changing about, but the initial change had to come from individual people saying, you know, put out that cigarette, you know, that's not healthy for me. I'm not going to smoke. And we hope bias is the same way. People are going to recognize how these practices disadvantage some groups over others. Oh, hey, oh, I got it. I got something in the chat. Let's see. From Delphine. What about educating graduate students, medical students, residents? What is the role of the institution? So yes, it is important to educate all members of the organization, but it is most important, if you have to get the biggest return on investment, is most important to educate the people of higher status, that is the faculty who are supervising the residents. So for example, when we translated our bias workshop for the residents, we did focus groups afterwards to you know, find out how it went. And many residents said, why, I'm all about this, but you know, my attending physician doesn't really care about this. And so yes, of course, it's important that the conversation go on across status levels within education. But if you are only educating the low status people of an organization, organizational change is not going to happen. You have to have the leaders on board. You have to have the people with high status in the organization, i.e. the faculty, engage in this. Let's see, is there another one there that I missed? Oh, you're welcome.
You can put questions in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and join in the discussion. It's really a rich discussion, and I so appreciate all of the insight that you brought. Dean Page.
Yeah, just ask just a quick question for Dr. Carnes. In terms of what distinguishes your career is your ability to make this passion and this absolute need in our society an academic track for you as well. National Science Foundation, NIH. Can you tell the group how easy that was? To convince people how important this is to be studied, and maybe, and I say that you and I both laugh because of the difficulty in the powers that be recognizing the importance of this work, and whether you think whether it's better now, and how someone might follow someone like you in their own career.
Well, of course, it has not been easy. And I sometimes save little clips from the reviews I get from my manuscripts because they're so incredibly hostile. And that's actually been shown to be true of women authors in general. No, so I guess my strategy, if you're asking for that, has been to try to take what I'm doing, which has always been outside the mainstream, and in every other aspect, make it look more like the mainstream so it can move forward. So for example, when I was PI of the National Science Foundation Advanced Institutional Transformation Award, one of the first things we did was establish WISELI, the Women in Science and Engineering Leadership Institute, as a research institute, because on our campus, everybody knows that research institutes are of high status, even though they really didn't see research on gender equity and academic STEM as being high status. In every other thing, we mimic, you know, we adopted high status. I think we published in peer-reviewed journals, although a recent paper by Sujimoto and colleagues doing a bibliographic analysis of over 1 million papers showed any paper that includes sex analysis is published in a lower status journal. But anyway, so lower status journals, but nevertheless getting out there and publishing in peer-reviewed journals. And I mean, the change has been amazing. I mean, when I started, it was so hard. If it weren't for the Journal of Women's Health and the fact that I knew the editor, I don't think I ever would have gotten anything published. But now, I mean, in every field, every journal you pick up, there's discussion and research on gender issues in that field. So I think That's huge. And certainly race. Although I was interested to hear that in a special issue in JAMA recently that was on health equity, all the papers were apparently by people from majority groups. We have a long way to go.
Dr. Leonard, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Dr. Dougherty. Hi, Dr. Carnes. I'm Chair of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine. It's interesting to think about the changes that you're indicating. You're saying that leaders need to be educated. And then the question about, do we need policy changes? And you put the education as more important than the policy changes. And I would argue that's probably correct, because in my department, I've achieved gender equity across assistant, associate, and full professor, and across my leadership roles and everything with the current rules that we have, right? So there weren't any policy changes needed to achieve that. So how much of that, though, could be driven or enhanced by expectations set for chairs, such as by the dean? Sorry, Rick. And does that influence at all a change in promotion access for women and marginalized individuals? And can you speak to that?
Well, I think it is, you have to have leaders on board for institutional change. There's no doubt about it. I mean, all research and organizations, the leaders have to be on board. They have to be making the issues seem urgent, and they have to weave those issues into all things, whether it's building a new building or hiring a new faculty member, that it has to be seen as an institutional priority. You have to be careful of anything that looks like quotas. That urgency has to come more from showing how, for example, increasing the diversity of faculty is good for your medical students. It enhances the vitality of your teaching, your curriculum. It makes better physicians. It makes it reduces health disparities and accessing difficult to reach communities. You have to make the argument there, which is easy to make because the data supports it, rather than to say, okay, 51% of the population is women. We want to see 51% of our leaders be women. Those kind of quotas actually have been shown. Well, research is mixed, but there is data to show that actually backfires and works against anybody from a historically lower status group who is put in a position because of a quota system, because there's sort of an automatic assumption they're less qualified. I'm definitely not
talking about a quota system. I was talking about the leaky pipeline, which is what your data that you cited in the literature shows is assistant, associate is less, full professor is less, chairs are even less for women and other racialized individuals. So that's really what I was getting at, is using the current policies, we can achieve stopping the leaky pipeline, but it's not set as a priority. It's building a new building, or as you say, there are other priorities. Being a chair is so complex that there are so many urgent issues for you to pay attention to that don't include gender or BIPOC equity.
Yeah, well, I would say leaders would be advised to figure out a way to weave those issues into everything and to keep on message, keep on note, let it be known that it is good for the institution and that everybody has to really take this seriously. And people and the awareness, I think, of the general faculty means that other faculty members get it and they keep bringing it up. Oh, our dean says this is important. This is important.
Unfortunately, I think we have to end our conversation here. This could go on for quite some time, as all of the gender equity education series conversations could. I want to really send my deepest thanks to Dr. Molly Carnes for joining us and for sharing her initiative with us. And we look forward to more conversation with you. I want to thank the members of the Gender Equity Professional Development and Education Working Group for arranging all of these events, and Tammy Candido and Tiffany Delaney for being our wonderful support in the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. Thanks to ComAV as well. Happy winter holidays. Some are past, some are coming up. We are taking the month of January off to give some breathing room for our education group, but our next session is February 7th at the noon hour. Dr. Kemi Dahl is coming to speak about getting unstuck in your career. She's a GYN oncologist at the University of Washington and a professional coach. We're really excited about that next session. Thank you all. Stay safe, and we'll see you in February.